Hey guys, welcome to Bear Loves Film. I'm Bear Clark, and today I want to review Sucker Punch. Now, Sucker Punch is a film by Zac Snyder, obviously of 300 and Watchmen fame, and then later on Batman vs Superman, and at least the majority of Justice League. Now, Zac Snyder's got an awful lot of bad press and a lot of stick really for the DCU, and he's got a lot of the blame for the failure of it. I don't feel that that's fair. I think he has a very, very strong visual style. Sometimes it is style above substance, but beautiful shots in Batman vs Superman, very stylish way of directing. Sometimes, yes, the plot is almost secondary to the actual scenes. It's almost like he has a scene in his head and he says, I need to do whatever I need to do to get this one shot. But he is definitely a very visionary director with a very strong style. Now, as I say, this was before Batman vs Superman. Sucker Punch was made. It had an £82 million budget, came out in March 2011. It was a box office bomb. It made around $90 million worldwide. So when you consider that that $90 million, the box office, obviously the film company doesn't get the whole of the box office, they just get a proportion of it. There's marketing costs, generally speaking. The guide is about half the budget for the actual marketing costs. So it was a financial bomb. It was a critical bomb as well, so much so that on Rotten Tomatoes, the critics gave it a 23% rating, which is pretty harsh. The audience was 47%, so it was obviously divisive, which sounds something to be expected from the director that gave us Batman vs Superman and Justice League. But what we have is, with Sucker Punch, is we have the basis, and this is a non-spoiler review by the way, but we have a young girl who loses her mother. She lives in a house with an abusive stepfather, and when he tries to take advantage of her younger sister, she actually injures her stepfather, protecting her little sister, and the stepfather, to get rid of her, basically pays for her to be put into a mental asylum. So he gives the backhanders money to the very corrupt people who run the asylum. And there is a thing about this asylum in that it's all female inmates, and what is actually happening is the guy who runs it, played by a very, very creepy Oscar Isaacs, he is basically using these girls as prostitutes, for want of a better term. And when this girl arrives, played beautifully by Emily Browning, she has to escape into her own mind to deal with the harshness of what's going on around her. So what we have is a film which is a mixture of the real, the gritty, the frightening, occasionally perverse, and then we have a fantasy land which is far more Dungeons and Dragons sort of effect, and she escapes into this world in her head, and she takes along with her some other female inmates, basically become like a warrior team in their head. And it's a very, very clever way of showing us how these beautiful, strong women actually cope with what's going on around them, because what they do in the fantasy actually relates to what's happening in the real world. Now, to say exactly how that works would spoil the film, but suffice to say that the asylum is suitably gritty and depressing. As I say, Oscar Isaac is amazing in this film. He's a great actor, let's face it, but he's amazing in this film because he gets across this real sense of creepiness and control. Although he has shouting outbursts and terrifies the girls when he does so, just his look and his mannerism and his presence in the room is enough to add a sense of dread for these girls. And then when we go into the fantasy world, we are talking full-on fantasy. We are talking about, they basically take on a different look, although it's the same actresses all the way through. When they're in their fantasy world, they've gone from being in their drab prison overalls to being, has to be said, very sexual in their look. We're talking about Baby Doll, who's Emily Browning's main character. She is essentially dressed as a schoolgirl, with Japanese samurai swords and machine guns, etc. Her other inmate friends are similarly dressed. We're talking basques, stockings and suspenders, machine guns, machetes, etc. So it's got a real heavy hit to the eyes, this film. The visuals are sumptuous. They are beautiful. As I say, Zac Snyder does get a rap for being style over substance, and I believe the majority of the critics who've seen this film think that's exactly the case. They think it's a convoluted mess, the narrative doesn't make sense, that all Snyder's doing is just trying to get the shots, and also there are people who would consider this basically for this film to be eye candy for men. And I understand that. I mean, you've got people like Emily Browning, and you've got Abby Cornish, who's drop dead gorgeous. All the female leads in this film are gorgeous, and they are dressed extremely provocatively, and it's easy to see how some people would say that is degrading to the women. And I can understand exactly where people will come from that. But if you take the time to watch the movie and really follow what they're saying, how they're saying it, I would argue that instead of this just being sexualized women kicking butts for men's visual pleasure, I would also say what it shows is very strong and brave women who use their sexuality and their brains to manipulate, overcome, survive and escape the brutality and control of men. So I do think there are two sides to this coin, and I think it's unfair to just see it in one way. I think you need to consider it from both sides. Now, the soundtrack in this is fantastic, so good I immediately went and downloaded it onto iTunes, and I regularly listen to it in the car. As I say, the visuals are sumptuous, they are beautiful, and the fantasy worlds, they all have a particular theme to them. So you have one where they are battling a fire-breathing dragon. There are others when they're in a futuristic city, or a train going into a city. There's almost a World War I sort of trenches scene, which is fabulous, which also has mech tech involved with it as well, where one of the girls basically flies a giant mech suit while she's fighting zeppelins and that sort of thing. So if you looked on Rotten Tomatoes and you saw a 23% critic rating, you would say, oh God, I'd avoid this film like the plague. And if you looked at the controversy with Batman vs Superman, or if you didn't enjoy Batman vs Superman, again you would look and think, oh, it's another Zac Snyder film, I'll give it a miss. But guys, I really believe you should give this film a look. I actually love this film. I love this film so much, I think it's actually probably in my top 10 favourite films of all time. Now, yes, I'm obviously in a minority compared to all the other critics, and you might totally disagree if you've seen the film and you think it's trash. But if you haven't seen the film, I would definitely recommend that you give it a try. It is stunning to look at. The soundtrack's amazing, really solid performances. If you actually follow what happens and think carefully about the events which lead up to the very final frames of the film, you actually realise it's a lot smarter than just somebody daydreaming just to get past the drudgery or the pain of being locked away. It's definitely a film that I would recommend, and for me, Sucker Punch gets a well-deserved A-. I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I produce reviews and news videos every week. Until next time, I'll see you later.